What's up, y'all? I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about using vintage lenses on modern mirrorless cameras. Most of this stuff isn't specific at all to the camera, but I am using a Lumix S5ii, so I have some S5ii specific stuff coming up in a minute. I've been shooting on my S5ii for the last week or so using an Olympus 50mm f1.4. I've adapted the Olympus lens using a Folsy adapter that I picked up on Amazon. Unrelated, but Folsy sounds like an old-timey disease that you get from drinking water tainted with horse urine or something, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, it's a cheap piece of metal. By that I mean it's not like smart in any way, like some adapters which give you contacts to transmit aperture settings to the camera or do focus confirmation or anything like that, because I kind of felt like that was a waste of money. I tend to like to use old full manual lenses like this one that don't have any contacts in the first place. This is, again, the Olympus Zuiko, which I'm probably saying wrong, 51.4. The adapter seems pretty well made and everything fits tightly together with no slop. For less than $30, I'm going to call that a win. Infinity focus is actually correct, stop down all the way to f16 on this lens, but it's pretty far out of focus wide open at f1.4. It's not really a deal breaker to me, and it's a common issue on cheap adapters. I think the logic is that it's better to err on the side of infinity focus being a little bit back from the marking versus having it end up being like past the limit of the lens's focus travel. One's mildly annoying and the other one makes the lens completely unusable. But the vast majority of the time I'm going to be, focusing manually anyway. Also, I tend to put a manual focus vintage lens on my camera when I want to do some slower paced, more intentional photography. If I want fast focus acquisition, I would just use a lens with autofocus. Speaking of modern lenses, I guess I should kind of touch on why you might want to do this in the first place. First off, I think shooting old vintage full manual lenses makes you a better photographer overall. At least it does me. If you've only shot with autofocus, you probably understand the relationship between aperture and depth of field. But shooting an old manual lens, especially if it's a pretty fast one like that 1.4, really drives that point home. It helps me intuitively know what aperture I want for a desired depth of field better than watching the camera do it automatically. Something about literally trying to focus on an object when the lens is wide open and seeing just how shallow that depth of field is helps. It's kind of like the difference between intellectually knowing how to change the oil in your car and then actually doing it. Getting your hands dirty helps you learn how things actually work in practice. Modern lenses are objectively optically better. But me and a lot of other people have noticed that optical perfection is kind of boring. You hear a lot of people talk about a lens's character, which is a much nicer way of saying crappiness, or more accurately, like imperfections. Older lenses were not anywhere near close to as optically perfect as modern lenses, and while sometimes you might want that cold scientific accuracy, older lenses that weren't as perfect result in pictures that are sometimes more pleasing to look at. You can see this in action as people buy expensive, fast, optically perfect lenses and then fit them with diffusion filters to make them less sharp. I actually do this myself. I don't like a strong diffusion effect, but I do like something like 1/8 strength diffusion filter most of the time because it results in a slightly softer image that's actually more pleasing to look at. Even first-party OEMs are kind of getting in on this trend. Nikon in particular recently released some new primes. Everybody was a little bit baffled by them because the standard range of lenses usually goes something like this. So there's slower lenses that are relatively cheap, and then faster, better lenses for more money. For example, Panasonic makes the Lumix S50 1.8, which retails for $447, although it's currently on sale. It was $247 when I wrote this, but it's $347 now for some weird reason. Then they sell the Lumix S Pro 50 1.4, which retails for $2,297. The faster lens is optically better, mostly by being sharper, and it's more expensive by quite a lot in this case. This is pretty much the way it has always been from every camera lens manufacturer. Nikon caught everyone off guard by shaking up this like long-standing convention. They've sold their Nikkor Z f1.8 lenses for like quite a while, pretty much since Z mount has been a thing. Just for comparison, let's look at the 50 millimeter lenses. They have a 50 f1.8, which retails for $626. Then they confused the hell out of everyone by releasing a 50 1.4, which retails for $496. So the faster lens is cheaper, but it's because they went with a simpler, less optically perfect design in favor of a lens with more character. And everyone seems to really like it. It's actually not as sharp as the slower, more expensive 1.8, but it's fast and it takes pleasing photos. Of course, you could use these old lenses on old cameras. And in fact, that's why I own the Olympus lens in the first place. This is the 1.8 version of it. It goes on my Olympus OM2N, which is a 35 millimeter film camera, which takes really cool pictures with lots of character. The problem is, between film and development cost, it costs about $1 every time you do this. Cool for occasionally breaking out the film camera, not cool if you want to go walk around and take 100 or 2 photos. Like, that gets very expensive very fast. I found that using a vintage lens on a modern mirrorless camera gives you a similar experience and similar results to shooting old film cameras, but without the cost of film, development, and scanning. Kind of a best of both worlds situation. It's definitely not exactly the same as shooting on film with a vintage camera, but it's like 85% of the way there for like 1% of the cost, especially if you already own the camera and the lens in my case. Shooting vintage lenses on modern mirrorless bodies is in no way an exclusive feature of the S5ii. I also did this on my Nikon ZF with a Viltrox F lens to Z camera adapter, but the Lumix S5ii happens to be the camera that I have. So I do have some S5ii specific setup tips. You can just skip past this if you have a different camera. And these are all just like my opinion, man. So obviously modify them to suit your own taste or just ignore them completely. I'll show some videos of where the settings are as well. First off, by default, the focus zoom is set up in picture-in-picture mode. I guess the idea is to be able to check your focus while you can still kind of see your overall composition, but my eyes are old and they suck. So I changed the setting to be full screen zoom. In other words, the entire screen zooms in instead of just like a little box in the middle. This one's located under the setting gear, the third one down, then under autofocus, the second one down, then manual focus assist about halfway down. If you select that, the next to last item is manual focus assist display. I set this to full. Also, I find the focus button kind of hard to reach. It's up by the EVF. In manual mode, that's what does the zoom in by default. You can go into the settings and change it so that pressing in on the focus joystick zooms in as well. And I find this a lot more comfortable. This is the same menu as the last one under manual focus assist. And the option for this one is press joystick. Just switch that to on. Finally, I don't like focus peaking. I like zoom focusing, so I turn off focus peaking. To me, it kind of ironically makes it harder for me to tell what's in focus, and I don't really like just trusting the focus peaking. Maybe I'm paranoid. You'll find this setting under the main camera menu, then focus, the third item down, and then focus peaking. Okay, now that I've rambled way too long, let's look at some actual photos. A lot of these are shot in the Leica monochrome profile. Leica monochrome is one of the built-in color profiles on lots of Lumix cameras. I know it's on the S9, I know it's on the S5 too. It's a really nice black and white that to me goes really well with like a vintage lens. It just kind of has that old picture feel. I meant to go downtown or do something more interesting, but I didn't have time. Now would be a good time to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can stop going to work like a rube. But for now, I still have to work. So most of these are around my shop. I think the general feel still comes across. The first one is a picture of graffiti on my dumpster, and it was in the rain. And I want to point out a few things. It's reasonably sharp in the center, but definitely has an overall soft, kind of dreamlike aspect to it. The background blur is smooth and dreamy, and the roll off looks pretty cool, like in the over on the right side, where the sharp focus fence is like in super stark contrast to the blurred trees in the background. So I think that one's pretty cool. This one is a picture of my tool cart and some of my cars in various states of disrepair. I wanted to point out the light in the background on this one. This lens does not have any kind of diffusion filter on it. This is just how the lens looks. Yet the light on the wall in the background looks pretty damn diffuse with lots of like halation around it. This look is what people are trying to mimic with modern lenses equipped with diffusion filters. And this old lens just does that, you know. This next one is another example of that. The actual light fixture above my in a state of disrepair Jeep is not even in the frame in this one, but you can see how the light blooms out like from where the light is. It's just a result of older lenses being not as good as at keeping light sorted into like its proper lane, mostly due to like simpler coatings and optical formulas, but the result looks so much more interesting than if it wasn't there and if you just saw like a light spot on the roof of the Jeep. I tried to also get some kind of portrait style photos to demonstrate how the vintage lens renders things just kind of like, I don't know, smoother than modern lenses. So I thought this was a pretty good example of that. And this one is kind of a combination of a few things I've mentioned. Smooth rendering of skin and people in general, lots of bloom from a light, and just an overall dreamy, kind of soft quality to it. Just kind of a cool picture too. This one I just like. It's not a particularly enlightening photo, it doesn't demonstrate any specific trait of the lens. I just think it looks cool and I wanted to show you. That's all. So far, all of these have been in Leica monochrome. That's half because I think it looks good with a vintage lens. I mean, it's black and white. You know, what's its vintage more than black and white? But it's also half because when I first started taking pictures for this video, it was rainy and overcast like every single day for a week. And I feel like monochrome in general is just like the best choice for like gray, cloudy, overcast days where you're not going to get much like color anyway. But that doesn't mean that you have to shoot in black and white with vintage lenses. I've actually found a few LUTs, if you're also using a Panasonic camera, that really seem to go well with the whole like vintage lens aesthetic. One of my favorites is actually just from the Lumix Lab app. It's a Filmic with 2 M's because there's also a Filmic with 1 M. But this one's by Matt Dangu. It works really well in this situation. Honestly, it's one of my default LUTs. When I turn my camera on, my default photo mode is C1. It's a custom setting and it has this LUT already loaded up. And if I just hit the LUT button in Q, then it goes back to like, I think standard or natural or something. But it works pretty well in any situation, but it looks particularly good through vintage glass. I'm going to start off with a very similar picture to the last monochrome one. It was nice and sunny out with blue skies, and I think the color really works here and still has that old camera feel. As a matter of fact, like if we look at the last two of that old Chevy wagon side by side, I honestly feel like in certain situations and with the right LUT, color photos can have an like even more of a vintage look than the black and white photos. It's interesting how that works. If you're over a certain age, unlike me, who is very young, something about the rendering and color just says like this is an old photo, in the same way that when you see like an on-camera direct flash photo, it says I'm from an 80s or 90s disposable camera, like this. But that's a different video. Probably my next video. Anyway. As you can see, I was kind of starved for subject. So here's the same dumpster graffiti, but with the Filmic LUT. It's definitely different from the monochrome version, but it's also still cool looking. Like, you know, they both look pretty neat in their own way. This next one is not a super interesting picture compositionally. I really just wanted to show this one because I really like the combination of colors and the way the lens just renders things. It just looks cool. I'm pretty sure this one was actually taken not with the Olympus lens, but with another adapted vintage lens, the Nikon 50 1.4. It's a Nikon S Auto or something, but it doesn't have any contacts or anything, and a Photassi adapter. And do you see what I mean about the names? Would you want a bad case of Photassi? I didn't think so. These last two I just liked. They are with the Olympus lens, and they were taken in my backyard while I was just grilling some burgers, and Ava and Daisy were out there, and like I caught a couple of pretty decent, you know, photos with the old lens, which is pretty hard with a child, by the way. Autofocus is probably best for fast moving children, but overall, I think the S5ii with vintage glass and the right LUT or color profile can do a pretty damn good job of emulating film photography with a vintage camera. The combination of an actual old lens and colors that kind of evoke that old film look is pretty convincing. Not to mention the actual benefits of shooting on a modern mirrorless camera like ergonomics. My S5 II fits my hand great and has a big chunky grip as opposed to this action. Yeah, not so much on old film cameras. They are pretty small. Also, even with fast film, you need quite a decent amount of light to get good photos. Like, just look at your ISO number on your digital camera. Take a picture even at f1.4 in pretty low light, and if you have auto ISO on, your ISO is probably running up over 4,000. They do not make 4,000 speed film, by the way, much less 12,800 speed film. So here lately, when I get to the itch to shoot like old school with a manual lens, about half the time I'll grab an actual film camera because there really is something different and unique about shooting on the actual film that's really cool. But at least half of the time, I just put an old vintage lens on my S5 II and pick a fun LUT or color profile, and that gets me the vast majority of the film experience without costing me hundreds of dollars, which results in me shooting more often, and that's really the whole point, isn't it? I think that's about it for this video. If you want to see the pictures from this video, you can head over to my website. It's michaelsigler.com. I'll put a link in the description. You can look at the photos like full size if you click on them, and you'll see some of the detail better than I can really show you in the video. Anyway, if you like the video, it'd be helpful if you could, well, like it and also subscribe. All right, dudes, see you next time.